Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was the Blue Uchiha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Blue's Rinneya Sharingan widened, pulsing and cancelling out the shockwave that rocked out from the heavenly eye in Kaguya's forehead, saving Fire Country from being rattled into the pit's chaos. Though a few tremors rolled through the nation. A corner of her lips flew up, and so did her right hand, palm facing the endless midnight sky and fingers outstretched as if to grip the very fabric of blackness that was the night. 10 truth-seeking balls formed beneath her, whirling soundlessly. The wind found its courage and blew, flapping her imperial kimono about her, barely tousling the full length of her white hair. The man standing on the water, his knees bent in preparation, gnashed his teeth as his eternal Mangekyo eye recognized the jutsu she intended to drop on the planet, not from his memory but from the bottomless pit of knowledge that came with him being the underworld. At that point in time till this confrontation's conclusion, a good number of things the blue marksman knew and did was instinctive, coming from knowledge about the God Tree as well as understanding of the beginning of multiversal existence. It couldn't possibly be overstated how old and knowledgeable the semi-sentient God Tree was. A black sphere with a hazy white shell expanded from her the middle of her hand, formed from combining not just all 5 nature transformations but also yin-yang release, inflated much too quickly and far too large, roiling with controlled destruction contained in that massive ball of chakra the goddess of the moon easily hefted with a single hand. Expansive truth-seeking ball. Kaguya swept her hand down, throwing that giant ball of instant extinction onto the planet, intent on wiping out all life and splitting the world apart in ways it could never again be repaired. Both of Blue's eyes thrummed with power and he burned his way up Hashirama Senju's statue. The world witnessed what happened next. The stillness in the air and the turgid petrification of the people made Blue's words sound far and wide. Reflection, Susanoo. He leaped off the tip of the Senju's finger, holding his hand out to catch Kaguya's wrath, just as his Susanoo exploded around him in all its infernal glory. It started off as an ethereal white skeleton, with a skull that had no mouth but 2 nose holes and 6 gaping holes for its 6 eyes, each holding eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, extending its right hand up and catching the ball of infinite darkness. Then tense blue chakra muscles and translucent chakra skin covered its creaking bones, struggling to hold against the sphere, and then segmented black around rippled over its body, resembling scales. White shin and forearm guards formed by themselves, and last metallic hood draped itself over the Susanoo's head in such a way that its 6 eyes glowed ominously. Blue bared his teeth, hovering in the chest of his creation, and roared as his Susanoo's elbow bent beneath the weight of Kaguya's death ball. Death's hands hadn't been able to bypass this ultimate defense and yet the lady's death sphere was splintering the bones of his Susanoo. He pushed hard. His Sharingan bled. The ball blasted back to its sender, and the rabbit goddess merely absorbed it back into her limitless chakra network, tutting. All this effort for them. You're making this harder on yourself. Her voice was light and dignified, bearing a treble nobles Blue had encountered spoke with and still layered with a longing warmth, directed solely at him. Just how long can you keep this up? Let's find out. Blue replied, blinking his bleeding right eye closed and smirking wildly with his Rinneya Sharingan humming, festering to be unleashed. The crown floating above Naruto's head, filled with suffering souls, casually bobbed there. Gladly. Kaguya flushed, an expression that would have looked cute if not absurdly adorable if he didn't know she was capable of mass genocide, which she attempted not 10 seconds ago. Against his expectations, Kaguya beamed and opened her arms to welcome him, radiating gleeful anticipation. And he went for her. Tongues of fire and smoke curled out from the corners of Blue's mouth, his one open eye blazed and gravity propelled him upwards through his chakra construct, shooting out of its top left eye and flying to the Otsutsuki goddess. His body caught on fire from the speed but his clothes didn't burn off his form. His fiery shoulder tackle ripped through 3 dimensions, opening a gaping hole in the reality of the elemental nations. It was nothing like getting sucked into the vacuum of space. The closest comparison was if a wall from the living room facing another home was torn down, letting those outside a good, hard look on the other side. In this case, walls were brought down so all occupants of the 3 houses could see the other. Anyone with good eyes that looked up saw the neighboring worlds set in other dimensions, all of whom looked back at them with bewilderment. The broken walls fixed themselves and closed as Blue Susanoo dispersed. Ooh. The two gods tumbled into a new dimension created entirely by the blue sniper. All there was to it was a large island situated on a lake of fire, barreling into a rock-hard palm tree. Both grunted on impact, Kaguya wheezing with a laugh and Blue grit his teeth in a hard grin. Her arms gently hugged him, purring not unlike a possessive cat. She didn't seem to mind the scorch spots on her midriff, damaging her kimono. Ha! He looked down between them, realizing that 4 bones from her ribs were pierced into his gut, cutting to the other side. The area whitened and became thinner, falling off in flax and cracking into dust as it spread. His eye dimmed, sleepy. Neat trick. The princess smiled, rubbing his back as her ankle-length white hair covered them, murmuring into his chest. All killing ash bones. As the decay reached his nose, Blue opened his eternal eye and looked both eyes to the right before the woman's hair could completely cover his exit, projecting himself there by the time the blue in Kaguya's arms had finally turned transparent, falling away from her like a ghost. He dispelled himself as his eyes closed. The new Naruto whipped out a pair of kunai and spun them in his palms, observing his opponents for gaps with his 2 powerful dojutsu. She pushed off the tree and dusted down her tarnished dress, scoffing and pulling the bones that faded the old Naruto back into her body. Honey, you'll have to mean it if you really want to pin me down. All those centuries ago, the father of her sons couldn't handle her insatiable vigor, but she had great expectations for the blue god. He had a reputation among the ladies, she admitted with a bare twitch on her brow. Blue held the blades in a reverse grip, lowering his stance to something akin to a defensive position. What's your deal, lady? He asked, watching as she tied up her hair into a long ponytail. Why are you hellbent on destroying everything? I don't like sharing. For some seconds, all that was heard was the crackle of fire from the lake of flames and the hollow wind blowing heat about the dimension. Blue's eyebrows then went into his hairline. What? I don't like sharing, Blue, and I certainly won't be sharing you with anyone. She reiterated. Not with your mother, not with those cute children you're so fond of, pardon me if I don't remember the names, not with your many playthings, not with those accountants that work for you, and definitely not with that confused redhead you're pining after. She shrugged casually. I want you all to myself, and I will give my all to you. Honestly, Blue, I can be very jealous at times. Kaguya swept her arms down her dress, reforming it with yin-yang release into her orange sports bra with dark ninja grade tights and comfortable sneakers of a similar shade. On her forearms and shin, bright orange guards materialized, complementing her orange sports bra. Over her torso was a form-fitting, long-sleeved, mesh armor shirt, giving the man she liked a good view of her toned abdomen as well as the rest of her slender form. She didn't want to brag but, she looked good. Imprisonment in the moon did nothing to her body. Trust me, when this is said and done, you'll be thanking me. Connections like that can get really bothersome. Her truth-seeking balls vanished, bursting harmlessly and seeping into her being. The goddess couldn't help but blush at what she had in store for the blue Uchiha. Oh, the things they would do. She was going to take her sweet time mapping every nook and cranny of his mind and body, understanding him down to the finer points of his entire being, like he would to her, memorizing the dips and curves of her everything till he could recite the details of her soul as if they were truly one person. They were the most perfect couple. The most perfect match. The journey was already so close to beginning. The goddess could be patient, ease herself into his heart. Some alone time before we begin traveling won't be so bad either. We can really get to know each other. Properly fall in love. I'm sure you'll love me too. Unlike she hoped, Blue wasn't ogling her. He was trying his possible best to comprehend the absurdity of the words spilling from her lips. Basically, because he had friends, family and a life of his own that didn't revolve or even involve her was why she wanted to obliterate their planet, start anew with them at the center of the universe, possibly the multiverse as well. He shook his head, reorienting his brain, and promptly disappeared. Kaguya snapped her teeth shut and backtracked, seamlessly activating her Byakugan and powering up her godly eye. A halo ringed her head and Naruto's hellish crown hovered over his. Her horns didn't make her look devilish at all. That honor was reserved for the king of hell. Bones grew from her palms and she crossed them over her chest, blocking a kunai aimed to stab her heart. A bone fired out and clanged against the second blade, falling back and tucking into a roll as the underworld's strength overcame her, staying low in a crouch and digging her fingers in the sandy soil. She shot a bone to his position and bared her teeth when he deflected with the edge of the blade, spinning the weapon in his right hand and sending it to her face. The veins under and at the corners of her eyes throbbed, physically unable to move out of the way before the knife could bite into her temple. Her Rinja Sharingan pulsed and a shockwave threw away the weapon primed to stab that eye, and also snapping open a wide gorge between them on the island, not only pushing them apart but also splitting the solitary island in two. Blue stood fast, narrowing his eyes and sticking to the sand with his chakra, shrouding himself from the brunt of her eye blast with his own godly dojutsu. Projection. Instantaneously, the man had crossed the wide gap she caused, and though her body was in top condition to avoid the blow, she didn't have the skills to. The woman hissed as his fist dug a hole in her gut, hitting so hard she flopped over his fist with her feet dangling from the ground. Hair binding technique. She breathed out with barely a sound. As if having a mind of its own, the goddess's ponytail snapped around both of them, wrapping Blue in an unrelenting stranglehold that wasn't unlike being bound with rebar reinforced with titanium. All killing ash bones. All over her body, her bones jutted out abnormally. The ones at her front ripped into the man and his Sharingan bugged out. He called 2 jutsus before he turned translucent. Black flames set the woman on fire and she chuckled, breathless, turning her head to the left and creating another shockwave with her Rinja Sharingan, diverting 5 Senbon shots from the newly projected Blue, who was on the process of strapping the other twin to his left arm and raising that one against the goddess, summarily getting the 5 needles blocked. Kaguya clapped her hands together, irked by the black flames lapping at her pale features. 8 God's vacuum fist. Fist made entirely of vicious wind and heavenly chakra punched away the fire and destroyed what little was left of the island. Blue manifested his 6-eyed reflection Susanoo, standing on the lake of fire with it and reloading the twin launchers, flipping through 5 seals inside and aiming his launchers at the Otsutsuki's levitating form. His Susanoo copied the motion. Ninja art, Fall of the Rising Star. He and the Susanoo clenched their fists, releasing a needle from each twin launcher in faultless succession. Pop pop. Molten fire from the lake beneath honed up with the Senbon and Kaguya, knowing better than absorb underworld chakra, raised an invisible shield about her. She grunted as the flames impacted her shield, covering her sight if she didn't have a pair of eyes that could see through everything. A harsh curse escaped her lips, soaring under a brazen punch from the Susanoo but only flying headfirst into the knuckles of another Blue, projected inside her chakra shield. She laughed the cobwebs out of her head. The world warped around her and she held the shirt of the Blue inside her guard, shifting dimensions into an icy, glacial world. The two rolled and fell down the face of an ice cap. Relentless cold bellowed and the world's axis constantly changed, battering Blue's self-awareness and understanding of direction. North, south, east and west teetered and merged, and so did up, down, left and right, making that icy world a landscape that eternally rumbled with indecision as to what where was at what time. Everything was and wasn't where it was supposed to be, and that twisted logic threw him off. Blue's feet pushed off the ice cap, baring his eyes and surrounding himself with a Susanoo ribcage right before he crash-landed at the peak of a mountain. Thud. What the hell? The world he looked at, there at the top of the snowy, icy mountain, seemed to come from an Uchiha's worst nightmare. The curvature of the planet, and apparently that entire universe, was infinitely inverted. He looked down, comforted by the snow and cold his ninja sandals were buried in, but on looking up he saw himself there as well, face twisted in utter confusion and still protected by the Susanoo ribcage. Not disturbed by the cold, he dispelled the Susanoo and squinted his eyes over the desolate planet, searching for the rabbit goddess. Kaguya ducked into a cave and exhaled, bringing about a landslide to hide the cave entrance, a hand on her chest and panting with exhilaration. She didn't honestly think the inversion of his rapidly assembled universe would keep her man down for long. His mind was too advanced for that, though she only needed a few seconds to breathe and come up with a plan. The woman understood one overarching thing: she couldn't ever hope to surpass the man's hand-to-hand prowess as she was. She was a princess. Her upbringing centered on ladylike etiquette, war strategy and clan leadership. The combative aspects of life were left for her clan mates. The battle with her sons was done completely with her chakra and her summons, but that was likely why inferior beings like them could manage to triumph over her. Against someone of equal power and status as her, this battle would end faster than she wanted, and at her loss too for that matter. Amaterasu flames roared over the howl of the wind, eating away at her hiding place. Her Byakugan peered through the rocky wall and saw her fellow god pour the red-hot waters of the Sanzu River to chip away to get to her. He couldn't project into the cave because he could neither see inside the cave nor find an entrance. He could sense her though. Lesser men would strain themselves in search of her, but he knew where she was without fault. In spite of the danger she would be in when he finally got to her, she sighed sweetly. Summoning Jutsu. Koi fish swam out from nowhere, revolving around the interior of the cave. Like with Blue's crows calling up souls from their eternal punishment, she could call down souls from eternal paradise. Shinobi can go to heaven too. She found 4 souls that had what she needed and absorbed them into herself, sealing their consciousness in an inescapable oblivion while stealing their abilities for herself. Hashirama Senju, Shodaime Hokage and god of Shinobi. Ishiki Otsutsuki, the person she first thought was a god. Yahiko, first leader of the Akatsuki. Conan, angel of Omegakure. The last person didn't exactly die and go to heaven, but rather was in an out-of-body trance hurtling through space all the way back in Blue's home dimension. Ishiki would always have place in her heart. The memory of her blasting open his skull was something she fondly went back to whenever she felt down. As the cave wall exploded inwards, courtesy of a punch from the Blue Uchiha, Kaguya was completely imbued with the collective hand-to-hand prowess of 4 legendary ninjas. Her Rinnegan Sharingan widened. Universal pull. Reflection. The Rinnegan Jutsu hit Blue's unique Sharingan Jutsu, reversing the effect. Instead of him shooting to her, she was whipped over to him, cutting off her Jutsu mere yards from a front kick aimed at her chest and sliding under the attack. He snapped around with a roundhouse kick and she blocked with her right forearm, taking that arm down and clashing against another kick for her side, and leaned away from a blistering elbow strike that barely scraped her jaw. He didn't question her newfound taijutsu skills, pressing harder to land a blow and prevent a counter from hitting. The world's axis points turned and so did Blue's Sharingan. Kaguya shifted away from a right hook, sidestepped a knee to her gut and grunted as her chakra-blazing right palm was slapped upwards, leaving her torso wide open for 2 decisive punches until she brought her airborne right elbow down on Blue's wrists, lifting her left shin and using the guard there to block a side kick, dropped her leg and used her hands to push away another wild kick, covered her chest with her forearms against a hook kick and skidding back a few feet from the power loaded in that guarded strike. She barreled back to him and he sped to her, smashing forearms as they met. Chakra rippled outwards. Boom. The inverted dimension groaned and snowy avalanches poured down mountains. The princess beamed and her halo shone, pulling her left forearm back and driving her right fist into Blue's diaphragm, eliciting a wheeze from the man and retaliating by driving his left knuckles into her chin, taking 3 steps back and lifting an arm to her. Her pale eyes glinted as she ran around him, hardly dodging each senbon and leaving behind a trail of after-images until both twins ran out of needles, whereupon she called out a truth-seeking ball and bound to him, extended it to 6 foot long as she leaped up, gripping it in both hands and smashing it down on his overhead forearms, making sparks rain from contact with his mid-range launchers. Blue guided the vicious bash to his right in one smooth motion, also burying a knee into her gut and whacking her wrists one with the edge of his right hand, making her release the elongated chakra rod. Faster than anticipated, she regained composure after dropping the rod and a chakra-laced palm raced up and collided into his chest. It didn't carry a full hip rotation or a complete extension of her arm given her bent, disadvantaged position, but the sharp burst of chakra as her hand touched his shirt pushed him away, righting again though not predicting the leg sweep that took her to the icy ground. Chakra ebbed from their bodies, oozing from their pores. Her 3 eyes bugged wide and she rolled away from an axe kick, missing her head by a hair breadth. Their fight turned ice to water and water to vapor, clouding their vision somewhat as they steadily descended the frozen platform, tunneling down using only rapid, unyielding combat alone. Instead of reaching the world's core, the pair fell through the ice into endless space, stubbornly clashing in an oddly harmonic battle for physical and mental supremacy. Acknowledging that he couldn't fly like the rabbit goddess, floating in the void of space while still being able to breathe perfectly fine, Blue was finding it harder to gain an upper hand against the woman that had essentially been flying since she was a young girl. He did the next best thing. Universal pull. He yanked her to him and her hands curled around his neck, blue painted talons digging into his throat as he backflipped with her into another dimension. That new world wasn't one either of them created. Any subsequent dimension change was due to it being either the closest or furthest from Blue's home dimension depending on the fighter that manipulated teleportation with their Rinja Sharingan, and seemingly the most random pick out of the countless multitude. Their multiversal battle took them to many places. Ooh, what do you think you're doing, hag? Yugito asked, finished packing up her things from her hotel room in Zuki and now carrying a hand-sized scroll in a pocket of her Kumo Junin flak jacket. Orochimaru bit her tongue and paused, fingers digging deep grooves on a metal table. Don't push me, ni Yugito. I was curious. The Jinchuriki of the two-tailed cat said defensively, as if her words before were meant to be taken as a compliment. She entered the dark-skinned Sannin's operating room, curling her lips down at the blood-chilling tools hung up on the walls and neatly arranged on a tray. For your information, I'm waiting to hear from Kabuto. She went to Konoha to check on Itachi. Her black-painted fingernails scraped deeply into the operating table, showing her nerves only like that and maintaining utter facial serenity. Blue's disappearance to heaven knows where was wearing thin on her, especially with who he was facing. If there's a problem, then she will reverse summon me and I'll take the boy to safety. What about Shisui, Azumi and Sasuke? She snorted, amused Yugito would even bring 'em up. They're none of my concern. Both Kunoichi saw the goddess of the moon and they also witnessed the Otsutsuki's 2 attempts at global annihilation. That scale of warfare long since departed from mortal comprehension. The snake sage understood that everything now depended on her son, and he was the most capable to defend all of existence, but that didn't stop her from worrying. Not for the fate of the world but on Blue's health. She was still his mother. The man sat him down her, Yugito, Yugao, Kabuto and the Iron Accountant and told them Kaguya was determined to fatally sever his ties with the world. He entrusted them to look after his family, and as far as the Sannin knew, Itachi was the only other part of their family. Yugao was a tolerable though Orochimaru wasn't entitled to look after her. Last she heard, Kushina was heading an investigative team to the Valley of End, where the 2 powerful people were last seen. Orochimaru didn't care though. Itachi's safety was her concern. To him, those kids might as well be as important as Itachi. Yugito spoke slowly, coming around to the table and narrowing her eyes at the irked Sannin. You know that, right? Why are you still here? What? You're like a fly that follows a corpse to the grave. Naruto isn't here, and speaking to me won't get you into my good graces. I dislike your kind, constantly searching for someone bigger and stronger to cling onto, to leech off. Every girl that gravitates to him is like that, prissing and preening like feeble peacocks. The only thing keeping my hands from ripping out that filthy, pebble heart of yours isn't my boy but my bearing self-restraint. The mocha brown-skinned lady closed her golden yellow eyes and inhaled a shallow breath, exhaling and balling her hands into fists, fitting into the deep grooves she left there through her blistering rant. Do what you want, ni Yugito. Go to Konoha and watch over those 3 children, or seek out that annoying Uzumaki for a little cat fight, I don't care. Just leave, before my curiosity on your chakra network becomes too much to control. Unafraid, the blonde ninja placed her hands on her hips. Are you done? Snarling a little, Orochimaru answered. Yes, I'm done. When you've cooled down and you can hold a sensible conversation, I'll be in your room. I made curry and rice. The Sannin's glaring eyes followed the Kumo ninja as she sauntered out of the gruesome operating room. Hag. Orochimaru's chakra flared at Yugito's parting word and the metal table snapped in 2. There was a faint tug at the pit of her stomach and she followed it immediately, without hesitation or delay. On the other side, in Konoha, an Otsutsuki wearing a veil was sitting down on the right shoulder of a bigger, burlier Otsutsuki, at the wreckage of the Senju clan compound, where Kabuto called her mistress. The dark-skinned snake sage stood in front of her student's crumpled form, hands at her sides and eyes narrowed into thin, irritated slits. Momoshiki tapped his chin. My lady called. Ooh. Aruru, go put on a shirt. Kobayashi scolded, feeling a vein throb on her brow at the big-breasted dragon brazenly saunter into the living room, fresh from a bath and clad in a pair of panties that were far too small for her. Aruru groaned. I still don't understand you humans' fixation on clothing. It's called common decency. We live in a society. The office lady retorted, pinching the bridge of her nose to stave off an impending headache at yet another long-winded chat about clothes with the annoyingly innocent, and yet still perverted, fire dragon. Days like this, she honestly thought Aruru was rubbing those giant flesh bags in her face, even though Kobayashi had made peace with her washboard flat chest. Put something on. She pulled up the sleeve of her suit jacket and checked her watch, sighing at the time. Now I'm going to be late for work. Toru came into the main room, carrying a tote bag in the crook of her right elbow and brushing off lint from her maid outfit. She said in a chipper voice, and the owner of the apartment heard some underlying intent in her voice. I can always fly you to work, Miss Kobayashi. My back can't take any more of your flying. The human lady ignored the utter heartbreak in Toru's red-orange reptilian eyes. Toru sulked her way to the front door. She looked around to the fire dragon as she wiggled into a long, somewhat baggy shirt, reaching above her knees and sliding down on shoulder. Don't you have to go to work at the candy store? Today's my day off, but I'll drop by in a few hours to go and tease Take. Her delivery wasn't deadpan but filled with honest curiosity on why humans got so flustered seeing her chest, especially that boy, Take. Poor boy couldn't ever catch a break with Aruru. Kobayashi shrugged. Kana, hurry. Just as she finished, the little, white-haired dragon bounced out from inside with her bag. She bent her head and Kobayashi gave her a ceremonial hair tousle, nudging her to the door. Don't bother that kid too much. Aruru grunted and leaped onto the couch, flicking on the television. Kobayashi, Toru and Kana left the apartment complex and were treading down the street. The younger dragon was walking on a yellow line close to the pavement, balancing like her life depended on it, and Toru was busy proposing the health benefits of Kobayashi eating her tail. It won't be poisoned, I promise. No. It was just too weird. What if I barbecue it and mix in some beef? No. It's got dragon nutrients. She said it like that would be enough to convince her sworn mistress after months of prodding and proposing. I'm not a dragon. Humans can eat it too. Still, no. Toru stopped mid-walk and Kobayashi turned to her, an eyebrow raised. What's wrong? The exceptionally powerful dragon's reply was her baring her teeth and her eyes went up in flames. She sprinted to her mistress and picked her up in her arms, bridal style, tossing Kana over her shoulder. Alarmed, Kobayashi exclaimed, "What's BS shush?" The street behind them shattered like fragile stained glass and two people fell out, cracking the concrete as they tumbled. The crack in reality sealed a little but the blackness of space leaked in. Some bits and pieces of reality littered the road. In the fray of their mangled roll down the downward sloping street, Blue got his foot in Kaguya's stomach and gave a mighty push, ripping her hands from his neck and sending her down the street. She gained control of gravity and slowed herself in the air, falling down on her hands and feet. He rolled to his feet and fluidly flicked through some hand seals. Fire release, fireball of decimation. Kaguya had already finished with her own set of seals. Water release, tears of the kraken. Doom. The two opposing jutsus collided in the narrow street and their world stopped turning. Gravity faltered. More dragons. Kobayashi roared, looking around the dragon maid and grunting as Toru dropped her at the top of a building, a safe distance from the clashing attacks. They didn't give off dragon vibes. One was an angelic woman with heavenly beauty, wearing a sports bra, tights and sneakers with forearm and shin guards, while the other was a pale man with a hellish crown bobbing over his head, in a long-sleeved black shirt, black pants and sandals of the same tone, along with bandages wound around his feet. The woman had ankle-length white hair tied into a ponytail, milky white eyes like she was blind and an odd eye on her temple. The man on the other hand had black hair with a blonde streak traveling down the front to the right, also bearing odd, blue-tinted eyes. Realizing herself, Kobayashi yelled, "The town! Save the town!" The magic needed to shield teleport those two beings was monumental. Fortunately for Toru, Aruru dashed out of their apartment at the very sound of reality snapping and cracking. Blue was the first to cut his jutsu short, blazing around the typhoon of water rumbling up the street, wall running and flipping on residential houses until his left uppercut hit the woman's throat. Boom. Kaguya blasted off the ground in a blip of fire and light. Electricity shut off across a quarter of the country and the weather roiled with indecision, confused by the drastic increase in temperature as well as the radical drop in heat. The underworld's Susanoo exploded around him, propelling him up to his briefly dazed opponent. The woman would have torn through an airplane if Toru's dragon form didn't shoulder check her out of the way, basically shattering all the bones in Toru's shoulder for her effort. Kaguya roared over the bellow of high-altitude wind, angered at irksome dragon. 8 God's vacuum fist. The fists of wind and chakra batted about her, crushing an arm of Naruto's Susanoo and bursting open the end of the airplane. Blue ran through the gaping tatters of that arm before he dispelled it, but had to cover his face and neck with his forearms when two fists raced to his form. He didn't have time to fashion a proper reflection. He fell down not unlike a meteorite. If he reached the Earth, it would be yet another extinction event in human history, but probably one they wouldn't bounce back from. Ururu opened a gate on the ground and the man was sent to a barren plain in her home world. Still the shockwaves reached Earth. Ururu lost her arms as a result. Kana flew up and guided the airplane to the ground as safely as she could given the circumstance, and Toru mustered the last of her stamina and opened a gate to her home world, casting Kaguya and her fists there to continue whatever quarrel with that demonic man. When she was done, she landed and allowed herself the luxury of unconsciousness. As if they hadn't been interrupted, the two gods clashed, each strike reverberating across the new planet. Fist countered fist, shin countered shin, blows rained and counters rose. Then Kaguya got into Blue's guard and slammed her right hand into his neck, sweeping his feet out from under him and choke slamming him into another dimension, smashing through a dining table and interrupting an outdoor dinner among friends celebrating the ejection of Mongol invaders from Iki Island. Jin Sakai, the ghost of Tsushima, leaped away and drew his blade, so did the numbers of Iki raiders, shouting in surprise and apprehension at the two people that broke the long table to pieces. The pair were far from caring about the aggression of outsiders. Kaguya was straddling Blue, cracking her knuckles into the Blue Uchiha's guard in a relentless ground and pound assault primarily used by mixed martial artists. Errant shards of reality fell on them and the broken reality above oozed with the last dimension they were in, though not enough to pour inside. The Uchiha grunted with each blocked strike and glazed around his guard, forcing a pulse from his Sharingan and projecting over her, falling down with an elbow drop to the small of her back. Both heaven and hell fell through the ground and into another dimension. Kaguya stumbled into a kitchen, wherever the hell they were, and her back hit the counter. Finding her wherewithal like so many times before, she adapted and a hand blindly flew to her right, snagging a frying pan. Her Byakugan was on fire. The house was still, though for only 5 seconds. From the pitch darkness outside the kitchen, 5 needles raced to her face and she deftly banged the frying pan to divert them, finding a kitchen knife with her left hand and shooting it back alongside a well-placed gravity push. There was a grunt, accompanied by a maniacal laugh before a crazed clown was chucked back at her, her knife deeply embedded between his eyes. Woohoo. Pennywise hooted and Kaguya drove him away with a backhand across the face, but unintentionally left her middle open for a Spartan kick, breaking her through the wall and harshly landing in another reality. Miles Morales bobbed his head to the tunes pouring into his head from his headphones, working on a class assignment due the next day. He promised his parents he'd at least try with Brooklyn Vision Academy, totally oblivious to the godly pair tumbling through his room and smashing into a different world. The future Spider-Man jerked at the small shake and looked back, groaning. Gank, come on. Clean up your stuff, man. Thanos chuckled and held up the Infinity Gauntlet, while the Avengers watched on, powerless. I am inevitable. Tony Stark made to rush in to make a swift Infinity Stone exchange, till the sound of glass breaking halted him. BS shush. Guoohhhhhhh. Beasts ambled from the rift in reality. One was a mountainous, snow-white creature with a bloated body and 2 prominent rabbit ears that could vaguely be differentiated from its 4 curved horns. From where most thought were its mouth came jagged fangs and it had 1 single eye, red with black rings as well as 9 commas shared in each ringe. 10 tails swayed hypnotically from its back, a few shorter tendrils sprouted from its body and last were the 10 truth-seeking balls revolving around it, though none of his witnesses knew that. The ghastly creature wrapped 5 of its tails around 2 of Thanos' ships, hopping back and landing, creating shockwaves that briefly switched off Earth's gravity, and threw the Mad Titan's ships at the gaping hole that was the rift in reality. Another beast clambered into that universe. Some thought it was Cthulhu. Some prayed it wasn't Dormammu. This was Naruto's 10-tailed beast form. It was a behemoth, black hole of a thing that easily eclipsed the planet, weighing down the universe alongside the unfathomably massive white creature. It was miles upon miles of endless darkness, so tall and so foreboding Thanos forgot himself and stepped away. 4 horns jutted from the top, presumably the crown of its head, and the ends of the horns were a blazing hot red. Its arms opened wide, and if it hadn't done that no one would have known this thing had arms, and its own 10 tails flared behind him, his 10 truth-seeking balls spiraled. And its eye. This vision of death and damnation scarred those with the willpower to remain conscious, and it was something they would never overcome. It followed them to their dreams and haunted their waking nightmares. Its mouth opened and they saw rows and rows of pristine white teeth winding down to the bottomless infinity of hellish abyss, and chakra gathered before it. It aimed at Thanos' space ships, the ones Kaguya threw. It spoke. Giant 10-tailed spinning ball. Not only did the beam of pure chakra obliterate the space ships, it also indiscriminately vaporized anything in its path, turning flesh to nothing in a span of microseconds. Finally, the beam struck Kaguya and she fell on an assembly of Avengers and Thanos' soldiers too slow to get away on time. Thanos bellowed and held his gauntlet to the blue-tailed beast, calling on the Mind Stone. He didn't stand a chance. Blue glanced down at him, the fires of hell burned angrily in his one Rinneya Sharingan eye. The first indication Thanos got that he was way over his head was when the stone he used dulled and popped. Then the fire monster stepped on the Mad Titan. Whatever luck shone on Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Thor and the other Avengers facing Thanos blared brighter as Blue gave a bored grunt and rumbled to Kaguya, who was slowly rising up. The beasts butt heads and that alone cracked reality. Growing physically tired, Kaguya reduced in size to her humanoid form and pulled him inside as he followed suit returning to a human form, taking him elsewhere. She hoped her clanmates were making progress in destroying the elemental nations. Ooh. Konoha. The issue wasn't killing an Otsutsuki, it was killing many at once. War came to the elemental nations, descending like angels from the heavens. Hundreds of thousands of them, bearing Rinnegan and the bloodline of the rabbit goddess. Their instructions weren't to burn the planet but to subdue it, ready it for their mistress's annihilation. That didn't mean their methods weren't heavy-handed. Orochimaru held up Nagato's head by his red hair and the corpse's Rinnegan eyes flared open, forming a chakra absorption barrier and carving a clear path into the Uchiha clan compound as she barreled headfirst inside, pushing and shoving aside anyone not quick enough to get out of her way and summarily sapping whoever of their vitality once they glanced her chakra barrier. Kusanagi oozed with her custom blend of poisons and toxins, as well as the red life fluid of Otsutsuki that formerly blocked her path to the clan of Sharingan holders. The woman stopped when she got to the clan head's house, where battles raged hardest, and smelled the air with her tongue, taking a hard left to Blue Street. Everyone that could hold up their hands was fighting, elders too old for combat were herding young children into the forest till the threat died down. The Blue Uchiha knew what was happening and although he couldn't be there in person to defend his clan, he did the next best thing for someone with his command of the denizens of the underworld, he summoned the dead to fight for his friends. Any ninja or samurai that fell was promptly brought back, albeit having the brief scarring memories of falling down the abyss, but more or less ready to jump back into the fray regardless of the injuries that killed them. Any Otsutsuki that was defeated had their souls swapped with a long since dead shinobi of the continent to fight against the Astral Clan. Kinshiki, for example, was apparently the Nadaime Hokage Tobarama Senju. In order to not divide his attention between fighting Kaguya and selecting what soul went into which body, Blue gave that responsibility to his crow summons. There wasn't much he could do for his civilian friends, only send his crows to guide their souls to a restful afterlife. He hoped to resurrect them when all was said and done. He hoped. The man's mother found Shisui tending to Itachi's dislocated right knee and a sprained ankle, twisting his ankles too and effectively stunting his ability to run, while Azumi was doing her best with her bow staff to defend her friends against the mute Otsutsuki woman wearing a pink jumpsuit. Sasuke was crying. Blue's nephew spotted Orochimaru first, running to them and replacing Nagato's head with a medic kit, ready to handle first aid. The snake Sanon's chakra was too toxic for medical ninjutsu. Help her. The Lady Azumi was tussling with manipulated gravity and yanked the Uchiha girl's bow staff out from her hand, as if attracting it by magnet, bringing it down on the 12-year-old's shoulder and arcing her foot up, deep into the girl's guts. She looked down on Azumi with her pale lavender eyes, gripping the staff in both of her hands and deftly bent the thick metal weapon into a circle, carelessly dropping it on Azumi's weeping body. The scientist ignored the young boy's order and knelt down by him, knowing well that the jumpsuit lady was more in the mood for setting an example that she didn't mind maiming children than outright killing them. Itachi pushed away from her hands, flinching at the sharp pain. Help her. Stay still, brat, she snarled, gripping his leg in a firm hold, about to snap the dislocated knee back in place for the meantime. The dark-skinned Sanon glanced at a mortified Shisui, her golden yellow eyes narrowed. Give him something to bite on and hold him still. The speedster on the other hand cast his 3-tomo Sharingan to the pale woman that had fractured Azumi's collarbone, positively trembling at the agonized moans from his friend at his inability to help. Orochimaru snapped, unmindful of Azumi's suffering and the mute Otsutsuki's fascinated Byakugan gaze at them. Damn it, I'll do it myself. Itachi struggled, hitting her hands with his fists but not able to carry much strength in them. Help her. He wept, crying and pleading to one of the few of ninjas he trusted in the world. He fell back, pale from injury and tiredness, covering his eyes in his elbow. He begged her one last time. Granny, please, help her. And she listened. She didn't want to but she listened. ... Orochimaru always wanted to be a grandmother. She stumbled on her words, growing emotional and biting her tongue at the happy sob bubbling up her throat at Itachi's acknowledgement. Stay down, brat. I'll be right back. She directed an unrelenting look at the other Uchiha boy, also exhausted from the fight but rearing to get up and support the renegade Sannin. Look after him, them, she corrected herself, providing a pill bottle and a bottle of water. That's an experimental blend, a high-rate painkiller but still in the experimental phase. Give 2 tablets to him and make sure he's sitting up by the time he downs them. It's very important he's upright. Can you do that? Shisui bit his bottom lip and nodded, collecting the painkillers and the water bottle. Great. The mocha brown-skinned lady smirked, an invisible twitch of her lips and a resigned dip of her brow. She grumbled as she got to her feet. The things I do to be a granny. She certainly didn't think her son would give her grandbabies, and constantly suggesting for him to settle down with Kabuto was heading nowhere. Orochimaru couldn't ever have natural children of her own, Naruto being a miraculous case, and being his mother opened to her a world of glorious possibilities, filled to the brim with love, happiness, uncertainty and familial unity. For once when she didn't want to have children, she now wanted an army of offspring born from her womb. Her hope had been on her son and that was now more or less out of the question, with how Blue was resolute to not settle down in the near or distant future. Blood-related grandbabies with a woman she approved for him was a dream within a dream for the sulking snake Sannin. It's too bad, her son and her protege would have made such beautiful babies. Orochimaru would have spoiled them fat. Mustering her determination, she got up and readied herself with the dreaded long sword. The Otsutsuki's eyes lifted from Azumi's airless whimpering and she sighed in exasperation on seeing the snake Sannin sprinting to her, hissing a blood-freezing sound and gathering nature chakra to herself. Sage mode. Ooh. The rabbit goddess crash-landed on a moving car, crumpling in the roof and injuring the family of 4 inside. With a strained groan she rolled to the side and fell on her knees. There was a nasty bruise on her gut. A purpling injury underneath her mesh armor and beneath her sports bra, marring her immaculately fair skin. Not yet breaking the skin or pulling blood but nonetheless smarting like an annoying bee sting. In an instant she healed the wound and materialized bandages to cover the now graying bruise, though the dull throb was always there. Kaguya staggered up to her feet. Omni-Man flew down to her, concern etched on his face. He spoke to her curtly, hovering in the air with his arms crossed. Miss, are you okay? She neither deemed him a look nor an answer, ignoring his existence and searching around the hysteria for the love of her life, a growing smile lifting the corners of her lips. The woman had fallen down on traffic and people were getting out of the cars, looking over at her with faces mixed with concern and impatience, wanting Omni-Man to pick her and the wrecked car and take them away so traffic could move again. Her Byakugan flicked left and right. Transforming into the respective final forms of the 10-tailed beast meant that they lost control of their otherworldly chakra, letting it envelope them in all its totality, and having the presence of mind to use a tailed beast attack of that magnitude while warring with the primal urge to destroy all life could rip a mind to pieces. She might have been injured physically but Blue was suffering many mental aftershocks at one time, which was by far the worst kind of pain. Kaguya had briefly succumbed to the allure of pure insanity during that moment she was a tailed beast though realized herself later and fell victim to Blue's vaporizing blow, focusing on the pain of her injury to wake up and regain control of her chakra. The tried and tested thing to do while in that beast form, in cases like theirs, was to allow their chakra run wild but keep their consciousness in the furthest reaches of the background, so that when the insane Ten-Tails was inevitably struck by an outside force whether they kicked a pebble or were blasted with an attack, they would focus on that sensation and pull themselves together. Even though Blue was conscious and in control throughout his rampage, it was likely that the sensation that he grasped to suppress the chakra once more was when that Thanos attempted to hypnotize him. Forget being the incarnation of death and damnation, hypnotizing an Uchiha was a bad idea. In the Mad Titan's defense, he didn't know that. But does that matter now? Blue had the Rinnegan Sharingan and the ageless knowledge of the God Tree, so before Naruto took control of his uncontrollable beast form he was well aware of the consequences. It spelt how badly he wanted her gone. Kaguya wasn't thinking that though. What was in her serene mind was on the fact that both life and death lost control of their chakra at the same time made her more chipper, humming sweetly and sweeping all three of her eyes around the cosmos for her missing man. Could there be a greater sign that they were meant for each other? The pain may or may not pass. That depended entirely on him, but she would be there to help him recuperate. Blue, she trilled, singing his name. Omni-Man swept over to her front, tilting his head to the side and taking in her features with simmering worry as he noted the ringed eye on her temple. Miss, who are you and are you in any kind of trouble? She rolled her eyes, about to pass him. Then he touched her arm. Her Rinnegan Sharingan pulsed. Omni-Man woke up on Mars, worse for wear and unable to breathe. The force of Kaguya's unworded almighty push knocked the planet a bit off orbit, losing up to 20 hours in the process, decimating anything in a 10-mile radius of her. Ooh. Valley of End. A tick throbbed on Kushina's brow, landing on a rock face after yet another mighty gravity push and sticking fast to the surface with her chakra. You're really pissing me off, stranger. She dropped down to the water and charged Urashiki. Multiple shadow clone technique. A tidal wave of redheads dropped on the Otsutsuki, while the original stayed back and bit down on a chakra pill. She'd never had reason to use one, given how nearly bottomless her reserves were, but she was burning through her well of energy faster than her regeneration could replenish. Those chakra pills were so unused they could be expired. Kushina checked the pill bottle of chakra pills Chooser Akamaiki handed her some years ago, sighing in relief that the pills had one more year before expiry. She hardened her resolve and blurred to her opponent, trusting her comrades to fight for themselves against the horde of Otsutsuki that descended on them. Ooh. His head was pounding. His vision was blurry. His hands were shaking. Merciless tremors rocked his spirit. Thundering clouds surrounded his brain. Bile rose up from his stomach and he exhaled throw up, toppling to his knees and tossing his head down. It was a pain unlike anything within comprehension, best compared by combining a horrible migraine with a fatal concussion. He blinked off his Sharingan, as it seemed to be making his sense of balance worse, and he closed his left eye heaving on the ground bloody chunks, realizing that he was throwing up into a ratty old fedora. He neither knew nor did he care when or how he snagged the hat. The man's blue eye clouded over and he gripped his head, his mouth falling open in mute agony at the intense ringing coupling the violent shaking. Pressure built up in his skull. Blood leaked from his ears and nose. His eye was bloodshot. Blue groaned hollowly and fell to his side, tormented further by the sounds of the city. Wherever he was, he didn't have the luxury of relaxing in a dark and quiet room to ward off the banging in his skull. Meditating was crossed out too. Kaguya. She would find him soon. He staggered to his feet but fell sideways, hitting the wall. The man couldn't see anything, blinded by his headache. Blue exuded heat. He needed to cool down. In spite of all this, the blue Uchiha focused a thread of his awareness to his sensory ability and limped from the alley, crossing the street. A car ran into him. It melted like the tar road Blue walked on. A scream sounded at the sopping pool of metal blanketing the driver, a shrieking noise adding to the disorganized concerto clamoring inside his head. The front entrance of a butcher shop fell to the heat and he made his way to the back room, glaring his bloodshot eye at the two butchers armed with cleavers. He entered the cold storage, slamming the door shut after himself as the butchers called the police. Thump. Silence. The small window looking into the meat cold storage fogged up with vapor, then the temperature suddenly plummeted, not just in that room but for the whole building, spreading outwards and drastically cooling down the street. A few seconds before, inside the cold storage, Blue used the reprise of the cold storage on his headache to make more cold. Water and wind release. Combination jutsu, corrupted frozen wasteland. He spent 4 minutes locked in there, stewing in the frigid cold and gathering his senses, and during that time police officers evacuated the building and formed a perimeter around the entrances. I've got this, guys. Invincible came down from the sky, seemingly from the heavens, and flagged for the officers to stay put, carefully stalking through the burned down door, following the depressed footprints left in the wake of that fire monster. He shivered and rubbed his hands together, wondering aloud. Who is this guy? A misguided hero? A new villain? Whoever it was, Invincible was going to handle the situation. His dad trusted him to do this while he went and brought in the lady that fell on that car. Omni-Man's son tore open the door to the cold storage and caught the underworld as he was strapping on his kunai and shuriken pouches to each of his thighs with his gloved hands, wearing a fresh set of the same clothes and clean of his previous sick. The headache was still there, lingering somewhere in the back of his head, but all he had to do was avoid strenuous techniques. He snorted at his self-diagnosis. The most he could do for now was to keep his Rinja Sharingan eye closed and for his Sharingan to not evolve past the 3 Tomo stage, albeit now the eye was deactivated. Simply put, any technique that required higher than his 3 Tomo would land successfully but end up leaving him in a state he wouldn't be able to continue the fight in. Using his Rinja Sharingan would hurt like hell though wouldn't cripple him as quickly or as fatally as his eternal Mangekyo eye would. Kaguya wouldn't exactly be worse off than him, though she wouldn't be better. She would be winded and more susceptible to physical injuries, especially the internal kinds. That was the stage of the fight they were in. Sharp icicles dangled from the ceiling and the slabs of beef strung up on hooks were frozen solid in thick ice, needing more than chisels and hammers to chip them out. Chainsaws, probably. Invincible judged the situation differently. Seeing the man attach those weapon pouches looked like he was ready to draw them. That's not going to work on me. Blue's brow creased. I don't think we've met. I'm invincible. Ha. The Uchiha replied, delayed at the obnoxious boy's words. He couldn't understand a word the kid was saying. Not one thing. He finished up and was idly checking the launchers on his forearms, walking to the door. The brightly colored boy didn't move, so the man patiently said, "Excuse me." Mark Grayson's superhero alter ego shook his head at Blue's move to pass him, not completely sure he knew what language that short statement was from. "I'm sorry. I can't let you go. You've caused too much trouble and I've got to take you in." Naruto's blue eye stared at the boy and the boy maintained eye contact. On another day and in other circumstances, Blue would have been glad to immerse himself in other languages and other cultures, like he had been doing all his life while traveling the elemental nations, but now he was getting irritated. The woman he was fighting wouldn't teleport herself back to his home dimension but would rather subdue him and make him watch as she turned that planet to nothing. Back home, Orochimaru and the others were putting up a hell of a fight against the goddess's clan mates and with a bit more time they would find a way to prevail, given the semi-immortality he briefly granted the fighters of the planet and the fact he was reusing Otsutsuki bodies to house foreign souls to lash back against the invaders. Blue's job was to handle Kaguya. This boy spouting confusing sounds from his mouth, was in his way. Knowing fully well that the brightly colored boy didn't understand him, Blue still said, "I'm going to put you to sleep now, okay? If you'll just." Quicker than light, Blue tapped his forehead with his pointer and middle finger, and Invincible's eyes rolled up into his head. The hero slammed down to his knees and fell back, lying unconscious in that uncomfortably arched position. Thankfully for the teen, all the Uchiha did was strike his temple, whereupon a short shockwave met a sensitive nerve at the sides of Mark's head. Naruto walked over the boy. The costume's a bit hard to look at, but to each their own I guess. There were some alternate versions of Naruto that loved wearing neon orange and worshipped ramen, so the Uchiha didn't judge. As he moved to the door, he reloaded his twins, summoning a flurry of feathers to his right hand after doing so and materializing crystalline. He popped out the cartridge and checked the round of projectiles, humming and slapping it back inside, cocking it and smirking at the satisfying click afterward. He emerged from the door, one hand holding the grip of his weapon and the other running a finger under his nose, wincing at the blood. That harmless takedown he did on that yellow kid shouldn't have been so stressful. On sight, the police officers began yelling, ducking behind their squad cars and arming themselves. "He's got a gun. He's got a gun." They pointed their pistols at him. Naruto was taken aback by this reception, correctly judging that they were pointing weapons at him. Instinctively, his hands came up to show he didn't mean any harm, deftly holding Crystalline to his side, muzzle inches from the ground. Whoa, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. He didn't blame them for confusing the gesture for him surrendering. One of the officers turned on a megaphone and more of that odd language spewed to Naruto's ears, tickling at another headache. "Drop your gun and get down on your knees. Hands behind your head. Do it now. Do it now." Shush, just, shut up for a second. Naruto's head rang and grit his teeth, waving him away and lifting Crystalline up, properly supporting the middle and aiming with his one open eye. 1 second. Kaguya was jogging to him, waving genially and calling his name. Blue. Blue's aim was on her. His line of sight, though, was in the general direction of some police offices. They all opened fire. So did Naruto. While their lead bullets didn't reach the underworld on account of the haze of chakra protecting him, Blue plugged all 6 needles in his cartridge into Kaguya's chest, reloaded and added 5 more to their number, reserving the last for the Otsutsuki's Rinja Sharingan eye. She coughed, grinning and showing the blood painting her teeth. Each needle she pulled out by hand, chuckling all the while and horrifying the spectators. When she got to the eye on her temple, the senbon simply evaporated as if it was a mirage. Quote. Ow. She laughed, hysterical in spite of the dangerous amounts of blood she was losing from the poison needle wounds. Oh ho ho ow. That actually hurt, you know. Especially hurts when I laugh. She chortled, a dignified laugh if there ever was any, and wincing as she did so. Not enough to kill me though, 'cause I'm immortal or whatever. She tittered, healing herself in a flash of heavenly chakra but still wheezing from the closing holes in her lungs. Can I get a hug, Blue? And a kiss too? It'll make all this pain go away. Anticoagulants to stop her blood from clotting and targeted spider venom to break down her chakra network, coming straight from Orochimaru's House of Horrors. It wasn't nearly strong enough to stunt her stride, though the agony she was in was visible through her pure amusement. Her gleeful laughter shook those that heard, motioning for the blank-faced Uchiha to come for them to embrace. The police stopped shooting at Blue. We can still get this whole fiasco behind us, Blue. You and me. We are meant for each other. We are made for each other, she said, covering her mouth and coughing out blood. She cringed at the sight, wiping her hands on her hips. The utter sincerity and emotion in her words were the furthest thing from false, dripping with feelings for her destined. I still love you. She paused in her careful walk to him, startled. Honey, why you're bleeding? Her Byakugan widened at the bloody streams coming from Blue's nose. Let me help. Quote. Stop, Kaguya. Call off your people. He reloaded Crystalline, looking at her all the while. The sniper cocked his infamous long-range weapon. This doesn't have to end like this. He almost sounded pleading. We can be friends. No, she sang. Red liquid crawled down the corners of her mouth. I don't like sharing. Remember? His jaw hardened and his frown deepened. He shot her again. Bang. She slapped away the poisoned needle, inadvertently impaling someone else, wordlessly saying that she could have very easily dodged those last 12 projectiles but allowed them to meet their mark for his sake. Quote. Honey, baby, connections like those. Bang bang. Are bad for you. I know what I'm talking about. She tilted her head away left and right, letting the needles whiz past her ears. Trust me, Naruto. This was the first time she used his name since they formally met. She was serious. Blue sealed his weapon and blurred to her. He didn't need a Sharingan to know that she was about to use her Rinja Sharingan. The Blue Uchiha opened his own godly eye and it bled with the magnitude of the technique he was about to manifest. His left hand reached her mouth and the other covered the eye on her temple, but the jutsu had already been pronounced. Both gods mirrored the other, speaking as one. Outer path of the godly ones, dimensions collide and merge. One was spoken to combine the realm they were in with the reality of the elemental nations, while the other snappishly undid the first technique and restored sanity, albeit leaving them in the Valley of End instead of at downtown Chicago. The collision, merge and subsequent disentanglement by the underworld of Invincible's universe and Blue's world happened so quickly yet so noticeably it barely left a scar in its aftermath, only startling those that were there at their sudden appearance. Kushina, spitting out a tooth and cleaning her katana on her calf after dispatching an Otsutsuki tag team, was startled by the sharp change in wind. Her purple eyes bugged out and she wailed, horror-struck at his position. Naruto. The man whose name she called grunted as Kaguya hugged him, circling her hands around till her palms laid on his lower sides, softly resting her cheek on his chest and slowly stabbing him with bones sprouted from her hands. The fatal bones met in the man's stomach and crossed, escaping outside his body from his ribs. Blue exhaled, tired and bleeding more so than ever. His body started turning flaky from the point of entry at his sides, building at a creeping pace over his body. You're not going to die, you can't die. The goddess whispered, her words oozing love. Their chakra started coming undone, forming violent storms overhead and shattering what was left of Konoha's precious monument. You'll just be tired, for a long while. Scattered thinly across this dimension, but don't worry, I'll gather your essence together until you wake up. Dying for them meant that their physical form and their consciousness would be scattered far and wide to the outer reaches of the present universe, trapped in a state of limbo where they wouldn't know who, what or where they were. As the years went by, these dispersed pieces of himself would come back together until they recombined to make the blue Uchiha. It was similar for tailed beasts, like how the Kyuubi would reassemble after 9 years, or the Nibi would reform after 2. The number of years to return to a single spot for the 10-tailed beast as well as the embodiment of the underworld was unknown. Kaguya's Byakugan deactivated. The eye on her head didn't close. Kushina powered to stay on the ground, pushing through the skin-searing blizzard of toxic chakra, ignoring the rawness of her skin. They couldn't hear the Uzumaki from the eye of the hurricane. His body was starting to lost its color, sagging into her warm embrace and holding her in return, running a gentle hand through her hair and quietly undoing her ponytail. I can wait, she promised. I've waited before and I can keep waiting. She nuzzled her nose into his neck, speaking in a sleepy voice. By the time you wake up, I'll have breakfast ready. Quote. Thank you. She looked at him, almost startled. What? Did you say? The blue Uchiha looked down to her, smiling. For that breakfast when I wake up, thanks. A smile bloomed on her face, lighting up the heavens and intensifying the chaotic flurry of their chakra. They were losing control of their chakra. It seemed the last thing Blue would do before he faded was help Kaguya rip the cosmos to pieces while in their 10-tailed forms. Sekan, she peeked at him shyly, closing her Rinja Sharingan eye. Can I get that kiss now? He laughed, winded. If you don't mind. I'm a bit rusty, she murmured, apologetic, blushing at a fresh wave of laughter from the man. She huffed, embarrassed. Don't laugh. It wasn't a mocking sound though. It was warm and deep and carefree and, him. It was like sitting by a fireplace, curled up in her favorite blanket during a whiteout, safely indoors and away from the cold without a care in the world. He hummed with a lowered smile, judging that she had last gotten any kind of action some thousands of millions of millennia ago. A corner as his lips went up. Me too. Ha. You're rusty like a bull in a friggin' cow pen. She snorted, bumping her temple on his chest and smirking. You liar. I'm serious. He joked and she laughed, her shimmering face wasn't marred by the blood on her face. Yeah, sure. She wiped her mouth on his shirt and her blush increased. Let's do this. The hand ghosting the back of her neck slipped to her rosy cheeks, rubbing a light thumb on her colored features, encouraging her to crane her head back to meet his eyes. His sky blue right eye and the left ringed eye of his godhood. She stood on her toes and their lips touched, first as a small peck and then gliding together, seamless and kneading. The lady sighed and closed her eyes, melting into the man she loved. Her defenses lowered. His infernal eye pulsed and he absorbed her, pulling her everything into his Rinja Sharingan. Kaguya leaned away a little and the bones of her hands snapped, letting her rest her palms on his cheeks. Her pale eyes turned up and her halo didn't dim for even a second, glowing with her expression. Oh, Naruto. One last time, she kissed him and then she was gone, sucked in by his eye and absorbed into his system, barring her consciousness to a small corner of his mind where the shadowy faces of those he killed while on duty as Konoha's ninjas resided. The man was now by himself inside the epicenter of the storm, impaled by the woman's bones. He grasped for his chakra control and pulled the storm of beastly chakra into his body, separating holy chakra from hellish power, pouring one into the koi fish summoning realm and the other went to the abyss, the crow contracts home. By the time he was done, he was still fading. And everyone was dead. Everything was dead. The tempest didn't only cover the Valley of End or just Fire Country, it enshrouded the world, polluting the atmosphere from the ozone layer to the core of the planet. Gas masks and protective suits did nothing, saved no one. Human corpses withered to the bone, the skin dried and their eyes deflated. This wasn't a merciful, painless death. Kushina's corpse laid close to his feet, her red hair, dirtied by grass and mud but managing to be present despite the toxic air eating away at anything and everything, stood out to him. The toxic air turned trees and foliage to ash, deserts to glass, oceans, lakes and ponds evaporated, losing their vitality and killing the water life. Mountains and hills eroded, hot winds blew decay and rot across the globe, felling buildings and sweeping away underground bunkers. Green changed to gray and blue turned to black. Irreversibly and irreparably, the planet could no longer sustain life. Life died. The only person alive sat down with his legs crossed, too weak to stand. The large pool of water spanning between both statues was no more, dried up for being closed the middle of the storm, and so did the statue of Hashirama wither into dust. Still, his blue right eye rippled and shifted into Kaguya's Rinja Sharingan, adding power to his being alongside his left god's eye. It revolved in and around him. He was the crow and koi fish contract. He was Nagato's prophecy. I saw darkness. A sunless, moonless world with a hellish, fire-breathing monster with a blue Sharingan looming over the earth. A shadowy bird sat on his left shoulder and a magnificent fish swam in the pools of his whirling eyes. The end of reality. Naruto shook his head, refusing to bow his head to that man's words. I can do something. Single quote. Blue snapped his teeth and clapping his hands together, beginning the first of a few almighty techniques. Rebirth of the God Tree. Naruto's skin hardened, becoming something akin to the demonic statue of the outer path, and a tree grew out from around him, rising tall and high till the branches and leaves scraped the outer edges of space. Inside the God Tree, the man sitting with his legs crossed flipped his fingers to another seal, pronouncing his will over the multiverse. Nativity of the God Tree. The roots of his God Tree both dug deeper into the earth, physically holding the planet together, and others rose out and gently wrapped around the corpses of every person on the planet. The dead bodies of Jinchuriki. The desert nomads that used to be the Seikatu clan. Yakuza of Zuki. People of Am. His contacts and connections. Orochimaru, who died with her arms widely circling Itachi, Shisui, Azumi and Sasuke, hiding out from the deadly smog in the quarantine zone of her abandoned lab in the Forest of Death. Kushina. Wherever they were and whatever the doing, the gods' roots found them. Essentially coiling around the world, the roots of Naruto's God Tree rose up and encased the bodies in wooden frames that respectfully matches their forms, deftly holding them upright a few inches from the ground. He flowed rejuvenating chakra to heal them and restore their minds and bodies. However they were before the Otsutsuki invasion, he gave that exact amount of vitality to them. Every person that wasn't dead before the coming of the Astral Clan, he rolled them safely into his tree roots and breathed healing to their bodies, not yet returning life into their lungs. This action would have loosened up the structure of the planet, but he duly held the world together with his burrowing God Tree roots and his omnipotent ownership of gravity. Next he encased the planet in a protective sphere, and the blue Uchiha gave a tremendous inhale, sucking the poisonous air into the bluish-green leaves of his great tree and internally cycled around the harmful air, releasing magnificent freshness across the globe along with a bellowing exhale. Color came back to the desolate wasteland. Trees, bushes and roots found the will to grow again, oceans, lakes and ponds also cleared of the blood and godly chakra once polluting them. The sun's rays finally broke through the clouds, shining on the earth. Animals that died directly as a result of his and Kaguya's unstable chakra storm came back to life, bounding about their homes like before. Chibaku Tensei. An island on the opposite side of the planet rose up from the water and smoothed over, becoming spherical and careening into space, halting before it could escape into the void of space and sticking to the planet's orbit. Blue wilted, bone-tired from the reconstruction of the planet, and the God Tree lost a few leaves as it mirrored the man's exhausted self. The rabbit goddess's bones sapped at his willpower, lulling him to sleep with the creeping decay spreading about his body. It was like parts of his body at a time were falling asleep and he couldn't wake him up. His lower torso were gone and his shoulders were losing feeling. Grunting, he fixed his hands together into a seal in front of his gut, exclaiming his final jutsu. Pure world resurrection. Silence. Stillness. Nothing moved, not even the recently resurrected animals or the newly cleaned air. Then people of the planet gave a collective gasp as life and warmth rushed through them like a rushing wind, writhing and struggling inside the tree root pods with an instinctive will to escape imprisonment. Blue lowered his tree roots to the ground and weakened them, so much so that a wild push from the person inside and they would crumble. The people forgot any quarrel they had and nations ended the disputes, helping others out from Blue's pods and fetching them water, wondering how and why they were alive. In the case of Jinchuriki, they came back without their tailed beasts. All 9 beasts were absorbed into the God Tree, and thus the blue Uchiha. Buildings across the continent, though, were some things he couldn't restore, but the people weren't focusing on that. The full minute of them either ascending to heaven or descending to hell was completely wiped from their minds, even recollection of the demise, only remembering that they were under attack. Some tree root cases didn't weaken, instead hardening to a material unlike a mix of adamantium, titanium, steel and lead. Those inside didn't wake up. They were Otsutsuki corpses. Those bodies that were left behind while the majority of the forces fled back home. These dead bodies were the exception. They were not brought back to life. No one knew this, but the Otsutsuki would be slowly sapped of their chakra, personalities and identities, turning into deathly loyal beings Naruto called his white Zetsu. His white Zetsu would wake up long before their master. The living looked to those pods warily, and they rightly respected the tree roots not to try to break them open. Whatever happened to them, the roots saved them. Years later, buildings were raised around these root pods, whether in Kumo, Iron Country, Konoha or Hidden Star, becoming tourist attractions and the center of conspiracy theories as to what exactly they were. They were highly guarded and preserved monuments of the day the world almost folded into itself. By the time villages and countries gathered themselves together to send out search parties to find their missing and investigative teams to understand the existence of the massive tree that could be seen all over the continent, it had already been warded off. A blaring absence was noticed. This time, Blue told his friends and family where he was, using a crow to direct them to the place that used to be the Valley of End. Next to come was an event called the Migration. The Uchiha clan relocated from Konoha in all their entirety and made their home around the god tree, carving a small area of fire country for themselves. They raised mighty fences, giant gates and dedicated gatekeepers to ensure their privacy, doing so with the help of those closest to the blue-eyed Uchiha. The infamy of Orochimaru the snake sage helped keep curious prodding at their walls at bay. Blue's mother suggested Itachi authorize her son's iron accountant to release the inventor's blueprints to the occupants of the village hidden under the blue tree, keeping these blueprints a well-kept secret from outsiders. Itachi, the person willed all Blue had and owned, did not have any issues with his grandmother's advice. Attempts were made to steal these secret invention schematics and all failed. A flourishing civilization grew from that quaint settlement, expanding outwards several miles to accommodate this rapid development and growth, daring the fire daimyo and Konoha to say otherwise. Only a few special cases were allowed inside to live around the Sharingan clan's most powerful person. A temple of marble and metal was constructed, not in worship but to reverence of that man that returned normalcy to their reality. Offerings and prayers were left at the foot of the god tree, sending their love to the man that embodied all of existence. Long before any of that, Naruto, Blue, Uchiha mumbled with a quiet laugh. Prophecy my ass. He hummed, screwing his lips to the side. His spirits lowered at Kushina's tears watering the foot of his tree. Kaguya, I know you're there. And I know you're listening. The man spoke to himself in a raspy murmur, feeling his Rinja Sharingan eyes dim and his eyelids lower. Even if it takes me all of time. I won't, let you, escape. Rather than disperse across the galaxy, the blue Uchiha defied the expectations of his two different Rinja Sharingan. Sitting cross-legged and hands firmly fixed in the ram seal, his head slumped forward and his body turned to stone. Lingering at the back of his mind and locked in a state of limbo, Kaguya smiled. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.